Hello and welcome to People on Earth. Recently, we saw discussions on climate change and its impacts on food and energy security, dominating discussions at the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. This will be followed by COP27, which will be held in Egypt in November, where countries will come together to explore pathways to accelerate global efforts to confront the climate crisis. Africa is at the front line of the climate crisis. The human and economic impacts of climate extremes, such as droughts and flooding, are already being felt across the continent. In today's edition of People on Earth, we look at building greater resilience to the changing climate and also learn from the Australian experience. Joining me in the studio today, I have Your Excellency Bronte Moores, the Australian ambassador to Zimbabwe, accredited to Zambia, Malawi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Dr. Kaba, the managing director of Digital Earth Africa. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Sure. So to begin with, Your Excellency, what is Australia's position on this important issue of climate change and your country's ambitions and commitments to climate change?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about this. Australia has in fact over recent months been working very hard to strengthen our climate ambition and also to increase our cooperation and collaboration with partner countries in terms of the global response. So we recently submitted an updated nationally determined contribution to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So we've committed to reducing our carbon emissions by 43% below 2005 levels by 2030. And what this means is that we're on track now to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. We've not only committed to that, but we've actually recently passed legislation in Australia to make this law. So that's a big part of what we're working on, and we're also working, as I said, we're interested in cooperating globally on the response, particularly on adaptation and mitigation. And we've committed in the current 5-year period, 2020 to 2025, we've committed about $2 billion globally.
Well, I'm glad that Australia is doing great in terms of climate action. So now looking at practical actions, what is Australia doing at home through its domestic agenda to combat climate change?
Sure. Well, in order to meet these very serious commitments that we've made, we've got a number of policies and practices in place. A big part of it is our Powering Australia plan. So what we're doing, this is one of the key things we're doing, big focus on renewables. So we're putting about $20 billion into modernising Australia's electricity grid. So what this will mean that the reach of renewable energies will be much greater as we decarbonise our grid. And we're hoping that within this current decade, we'll have about 83% of Australia's energy supply will be renewable. So there's a lot of efforts, technology, job creation, adaptation. We're putting big serious investments into that, really focusing on renewables.
Okay, since you have said that, should Zimbabwe look to Australia for more of these innovative technologies to combat climate change? And can Zimbabwe tap into some of this potential and expertise, for instance, through trade and investment?
Absolutely. Australia is trying to position itself to be a global energy superpower and a major exporter of clean energy and clean products. We're very fortunate in Australia. We've got the space, massive land space, we've got the sunshine, we've got the technology and know-how, deep expertise and a great track record on innovation. So it's something that we're really keen to collaborate more with other countries on this.
Let's look at the Australia's aid program in Zimbabwe. Is it people-centered? And does it prioritize the climate as well as environmental considerations?
Yes, absolutely. It's both people-centred and very much focused on climate and resilience as such a cross-cutting issue in everything we do these days. So in terms of people-centred responses, we do try to contribute globally, including in Africa, to immediate humanitarian need, the immediate humanitarian needs of people. So, for example, we in this current financial year, we're giving something like $38 million to the World Food Programme, about half of which comes to Africa to help people in most immediate need. But beyond that, we're also very interested in building resilience. This is all about, there's immediate needs and then there's longer term resilience. So we're doing a lot to help build skills and capacity of people through various projects. For example, we had about 6 officials from Zimbabwe attend a course run by the Australian National University earlier this year on climate change, grid integration and adaptation. We've got some great collaboration between the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research and ICRISAT in Bulawayo on agricultural research and irrigation techniques and management. We've got the Digital Earth Africa platform, which we'll hear about soon. So we've got many ways which we're trying to work to build up skills and capacity of people. Another couple of things that are just very important to mention on the people-centred and climate-centred basis of our work is gender issues, women's empowerment cut across everything we do, and in climate change area it's no exception, so we do a lot of work particularly on that area. And we're also working to ensure that the First Nations voice, that is the voice of the Indigenous people of Australia, the longest continuous culture in the world, civilization in the world, is also part of our foreign policy and engagement. And I think we've all got so much to learn from Indigenous voices, Indigenous expertise and practice, and marrying that with contemporary science. So that's all part of our people-centred approach.
Okay, so you mentioned you doing something in Bulawayo. Is that correct? What exactly is happening?
We've got this great collaboration between the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research and its counterpart ICRISAT. This is collaboration's been going on for a number of years, and it's basically about it's basically an irrigation project. It's been doing fantastic work with a device that measures the moisture of the soil. Okay. And what that means is that...
let's just hang in there. We'll continue after the break.
Okay, sure.
Okay, this is People on Earth. We are discussing climate change resilience. Do stay with us. We are taking a short break. Welcome back to People on Earth. We are discussing resilience to the changing climate change. So, Your Excellency, you were talking the work you're doing in Bulawayo. Like you were saying, tell us more what is happening in Bulawayo.
Sure. Well, it's basically some terrific collaboration between the agricultural research centres in Australia and Zimbabwe. They've been working on an irrigation program which uses a device to measure the moisture content of soil. And what this means is that farmers, smallholder farmers, large-scale farmers can measure exactly how much water is needed. And what that means, of course, is that you don't waste water, which leads to much better water management, but also high yields and productivity. So it's been a really successful project which we're trying to build on now.
Okay, any other projects in Zimbabwe, not in Bulawayo?
Yes, we've got quite a few projects going at any given time. One is we've got a series of programs through the Australian NGO Cooperation Program, about 15 projects running at the moment across Zimbabwe, totaling about $3 million, close to $3 million in funding. In Mashvingo, we're working through local partner Christian Care, working on the government's project on climate proofing agriculture for subsistence farmers, which is going really well. We've also, through this program, providing support to ADRA, the Adventist and Development and Relief Agency, who's supporting the government's horticulture recovery program across the country. So that's working in many different provinces on using climate smart technology to help with this national agriculture recovery program, and many other projects.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I come to you, Dr. Grava. I understand that you are the Managing Director of Digital Earth Africa, based in Pretoria, South Africa. If I may ask, what brings you to Zimbabwe and what does your organization do?
Thank you for having us. Indeed, we are in Zimbabwe. Digital Earth Africa, having originated from Digital Earth Australia, hence now you'll understand the relation with Australia. It originated from Digital Earth Australia to the African Regional Data Cube. Now it's Digital Earth Africa. We are here as of yesterday because we were invited by Ambassador Mills to have a roundtable discussion around climate change and food security. What do we do as a platform? We are a digital public good. Why am I saying it's a digital public good? We provide free data access from satellite images. So using Earth observation, we can translate the information to data that can be used by government, industry, researchers and policymakers as well.
Okay, so probably people from home would want to understand, probably elaborate how Digital Earth Africa is led and run.
It is led, I can share a background around that. It is now, as of July this year, it is now being led in Africa by an African team. There's a saying which the team usually emphasizes: for Africa, by Africa, or by Africa, for Africa. It is an African program led by an African team. The staff composition or the demographics, so we have staff based in Pretoria, where I am based. We have our support staff in Kenya. We also have our support staff in Rwanda and Ghana as well. That is why we are saying it's more Africa-led.
Sure. So in the context of challenges posed by climate change in Africa and priorities to mitigate the impact, what is the business case for Digital Earth Africa, and why should we be a partner of choice for climate action in Zimbabwe?
I think it's pretty much based on our mandate. Firstly, delivering a digital public good. It means, for starters, our data is freely and readily accessible for communities. The most vulnerable in terms of food insecurity and the most affected by climate change are the groupings that are least resourced in terms of having means to access data or any information that will empower them. Our business or value proposition is saying we are available to provide that information at no cost to the most affected in dealing with climate change and also food security issues.
Just okay, so how do you provide the information?
So let me just conclude on the statement.
Sure.
So the mandate is also linked to our sustainable development goals. Should have mentioned as well our key thematic areas being agriculture and food security, climate change, land degradation, coastal erosion, amongst others. And the question as to how do we provide this information is through working with our delivery model is premised on working with implementing partners. So in each region you'll have an implementing partner that you work with, also linked to our capacity building as well. So how we deliver the information could be through government, through our implementing partners, or through our officials themselves.
Okay, so please provide examples of countries where these technologies have been deployed or adapted. Talking of Digital Earth Africa, how we have implemented and strengthened efforts and Zimbabwe's efforts to enhance food security whilst reducing the impact of environment.
Yes, I can. In fact, the East African region and the West African region, so your Kenya, Tanzania, if you go to the West African region, Ghana as well, there's been a tremendous uptake of the program where we can even showcase our users' case studies. We also have Zambia now recently on a user case study that has been on the project that has been partly funded by ACIR, as the High Commissioner Ambassador was mentioning earlier on. In terms of the tools and services, when you're talking food security, you talk of agriculture at the core of the backbone of the economy. So the platform can provide crop mapping, water observation over time or water availability, vegetation over time. Our data goes back to more than 30 years ago.
Okay, So you have interesting and innovative technologies, and are Digital Earth Africa's tools and services accessible to ordinary people like smallholder farmers, or they are designed and only available for high-level decision and policymakers or private sector conglomerates?
Yeah. As indicated before, our platform is free open data access, could be accessed by anyone who has means to access the platform.
Okay,
However,
so
it's important.
I will cut you short. I see you have a lot to talk about, so let's do this after the break.
All right, thank
This
you.
is People on Earth. We are taking a short break. We will be back soon. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to People on Earth. We are discussing the resilience on changing climate change. So, Dr. Klaba, as you were talking earlier, please take us through on your thoughts.
Thank you. As indicated that our platform is free open data access. There is appreciation that we also need to bridge the gap between science and the people. Why am I harping on this? It's because this, as indicated in the previous response, that the most vulnerable may not have access to the science itself. It is our aspiration as we continue to collaborate with partners that we bridge that gap. There's quite a few models which in some part of the continent we've already started working with. For example, in Zanzibar, we've worked with the State University to bridge that gap so that the people on the ground get that information and how to respond on climate change directly from people who we can call food soldiers, for example. So in agriculture, when you're talking food security as well, there's quite a few models. In fact, my argument has always been it's not the same as much as it's one continent. So country to country specific, we may want to partner with people who are on the ground, who are working with those communities, so that our application or our platform can then be translated. I make a practical example of the Zanzibar case study, where people were cutting the mangroves, the trees, but by putting in place Digital Earth Africa platform and it being translated to communities, people did the opposite. They started planting the mangroves so that they save the environment for the future. So in responding to your question, the one part is it is free, open data access. However, we do understand and appreciate that in us bridging the science with the people, end user, so we have user engagements, those that will have access to the data, but we then have end users who are your most vulnerable, your food insecure, your rural people, women, and how then do we then bridge that gap between science and the people. And we have, in the past few weeks, been navigating the best way to do it and country specific. We are here in Zimbabwe now. Of course, discussions are pretty much at a premature stage, but we do see areas of collaboration. I think appreciating the fact that food security or food insecurity remains a challenge, not only in Zimbabwe. I call it a common challenge across government in the African continent.
Okay, you are coming from South Africa.
Yes.
Probably you'd want to share with us more what you are doing on the ground in South Africa.
So in South Africa, as a base, just remember we are hosted in South Africa. This is not a South African program, but an African program.
Sure.
So South Africa, it's a host country to the program. We have also in South Africa started engaging with government. I think I've indicated before that the uptake of the platform is now more on the East African region and the West African region. And part of me being here now is to bring the uptake or the use of the platform within the SADC region and also not neglecting the North African region as well. I can point out that in Botswana, for example, the Okavango user case study, and Zambia, as indicated already, those are the cases we can showcase within the SADC region. But what is important in this discussion is that now Zimbabwe and South Africa, we have started discussions with government to see how we can collaborate in using Digital Earth Africa.
Okay, so before we end the program, Her Excellency, what should be your parting words?
We look forward to more collaboration with Zimbabwe in support of the government programs and also the fantastic range of people working on climate and resilience issues here. We had a great round table yesterday at our embassy involving Digital Earth Africa, government, very senior government representatives, many NGOs, a bit of the private sector, doing fantastic work. And I think the brilliance and the creativity of the cross-section of people in Zimbabwe working on these issues is very impressive, and we're delighted as Australia to be working with Zimbabwe on these really important issues.
Okay, sure.
Thank
So,
you.
Dr. Kaba, before we end the program.
Thank you. I think at the core of our delivery is diversity and inclusion. We would like to see more women and youth benefiting from the program. I also need to point out that in terms of our capacity building program, every Wednesday, 11 o'clock GMT zone, there's live sessions. People can log in on the len.digitalearthafrica.org to register for those live sessions so they can get to be trained and empowered on the platform itself.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Kaba, and Your Excellency. Thank you very much for coming and sharing with us on such an important topic.
Thank you so much for having us.
We have also learned from today's panel discussion how Australia's aid program promotes climate resilience through innovative technologies, as alluded to by Dr. Kaba of Digital Earth Africa. Thank you for coming to the program. Viewers, thank you very much for watching your favorite program, People on Earth. Till we meet again, good night.